Welcome to the Answer is Yes podcast, where we interview some of the most interesting people that have said yes to opportunities in their life. We hope that through these stories, you can learn to create your own destiny by saying yes along the way. Join us as we explore the new series covering topics such as passion, integrity, and hard work. I'm your host, Jim Riley, and I hope you enjoy these interviews as much as I do. I believe that everyone has an important message worth hearing. Hello and welcome to the Answer is Yes podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Gosh, thanks for all your wonderful comments over the holiday season into the new year. It makes it all worth it. It's amazing. I've been on a roll pushing out shows with some great guests the last 4 or 5 months. But it's funny when I miss a week or I miss a show on time, the text messages, the emails start coming in. It's like, hey, I'm on my way to work. Where's this show at? So we are going to be super disciplined in 2022 to make sure we get these shows out to you on time. We're stacking some up, so you can anticipate that. But, you know, in all these interviews I've done recently, I've met so many great people, and I continue to meet more of the same, and today is no exception to that. I've got Carolyn Buck Luce on the phone today. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks, Jim, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. You know, we have the benefit of having a Zoom call, and I can see where you're at and what you look like and all those things, but it is so colorful where you're at, especially on my side. So bright and cheery, and you've got a smile, and I imagine that that's exactly who you are as a person.
Well, you know, there's a story about the color. My husband calls this house Carolyn's amazing Technicolor dream house. And it came about because when I was 60, I got remarried to this wonderful man, and we climbed Kilimanjaro on our honeymoon.
Wow.
Although we were not climbers. And we fell in love with a bird called a lilac-breasted roller. Lilac-breasted roller. I encourage everyone to look up this bird. This bird has the most amazing colors. And I thought, you know what? If nature can do that to a bird, I can do that to my house. So every room is 3 different hues of this amazing bird, lilac-breasted roller, my amazing Technicolor dream house.
I noticed that your website's picked up some of those colors as well. We'll make sure we put that on your show notes for today. You know, I'm always fascinated by everyone's background and how they got to where they're at today. Your background is long and vast, but I would love for you to take us back a little bit to where maybe you think that it all started at, and that doesn't matter if that's on the playground of your junior high or your college days. But where was it started for you when things started to get exciting or you started to realize your passion in life?
You know, Jim, I remember exactly where I was. I was 8 years old. I was on the lawn of my best friend's house, Louise's house. It was 1960. John F. Kennedy was running for president. This was the first time that presidential politics was televised. He was running against Richard Nixon. And he said, don't ask what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. And I woke up. I sort of went from a little girl to a baby citizen and realized that there was a world out there and everyone was being called to do something. And we were in the middle of the Cold War. And that was the sort of existential crisis that I was awake to.
Right.
So that began a process for me, which I now call the decade game. At the time, I didn't know what to call it. I decided I needed to make a plan. And figure out what I was going to do when I grew up, which at that point was what happens after you go to college. And in fact, I made a plan. And after college, actually in college, I chose a college where I could learn Russian. And my first job was a diplomat in the Soviet Union in the mid-70s.
Wow.
To sort of tell America's story.
Yeah.
Because that was what I felt called to do. So that's where it started.
What role did your parents play in this vision at such a young age and into high school and into college? I'd be curious to know how they felt about all this.
Well, it's really a great question. I'm blessed that my mother was one of only two women in her law school class, University of Chicago in the 40s, which was very unusual. Mm-hmm. And she and my father, who was at the University of Chicago Law School on the GI Bill, met. And I grew up in this family that was, in the middle of civil rights and in the middle of believing that citizens actually play a role in the country and make a difference. So I come from good genes, good stock.
Yeah, sure. So here you're off in Russia, which most people would never imagine, especially in the 70s. What transpired over there and what came out of that when you worked your way back to the United States?
So imagine I was one of 20 humans picked specifically for this job. We had a life-size American home that 10,000 Russians would walk through every day.
Wow.
10,000. And I had two stands, sort of imagine like Disneyland or Epcot. Mm-hmm. I had the modern living room, which was very cool, and then heating, ventilating, and air conditioning, which was not so cool to me, but was very cool to the Russians.
Sure.
But there I was telling America's story. And what really hit me was the importance of having a story of possibilities. Because it was in the middle of, again, the Cold War. People had never met Americans. We all had our own story of the other person hurting each other. And I really felt that if people could understand that there's a different story out there, a different narrative, and it's a choice, then possibilities could happen.
Yeah. Wow. For our younger audience, could you tell us briefly what was going on in Russian-U.S. politics at the time, just for a point of reference?
Sure. So actually, today as we speak, the Russians and the Americans are having a conversation about not invading the Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Well, let's just go back to the 50s, 60s, and 70s, where the biggest threat for America was communism.
Yeah.
And the Soviet Union at the time, which incorporated Russia and many other countries that Russia had invaded, and the United States were building up nuclear weapons, and both sides very concerned that we would use them. So when I was 8 years old, we would have drills in school. We would have to hide under our desk or in our lockers, or time how long it took us to run home to see whether we could get home before the bombs would strike. I mean, that was the reality.
Yeah.
So it was what we now call the Cold War, and it was super cold.
We still did some of those bomb drills when I was a child. I know exactly what you're talking about. Most of our audience has no idea unless they really studied in history. I just think it's fascinating that you were over there representing the country in that manner, showcasing who we are as Americans. Just as a quick sidebar, for those that haven't traveled and really spent time out of the United States, there's an importance to understanding different cultures, which certainly you understood and could respect once you left there, how they grew up, how they lived, and what they were indoctrinated into are all that they knew. Right after 9/11, I spent almost a month down in South Africa, Morocco specifically, traveling around, and I didn't know much about the Muslim religion and how passionate they were, the fact that they prayed 5 times a day, didn't matter where they were at, including the bathroom at a gas station, and I came home with a completely different understanding of the Muslim religion and their faith and how they practice that faith. So I want to encourage people to get out beyond these borders and understand the cultures that are coming here to live in America. It's so important.
Absolutely. And to know that we are a country of immigrants. So we all have an ancestral story. Mm-hmm. And then we're here. And to be able to actually recognize that America is really quite a unique experiment.
Yeah.
And to both appreciate other cultures and appreciate what we have here and be committed to make a world that works for each other is part of what comes from travel.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm very interested in talking about what you're doing today, but can you connect the dots between coming back from Russia and what transpired after to get us to today?
Sure. Well, I've had the opportunity of reinventing myself every decade. Mm-hmm. And that's been part of my practice in terms of my decade game.
Yeah.
So professionally, I've always been focused on where can I make the greatest impact based on my unique contributions, what I can do. And what I realized so I went from diplomacy into business because I really believed that the private sector business could actually be a huge engine for transformation if we had conscious leaders who were willing to think about what was a win-win-win. People now talk about that as, profits, people, and planet. And so I went into business, and I was an international banker, and then I was a Wall Street banker, and then I was a management consultant. And now I'm an executive coach and transformational leader. But all of that has been based on sort of reinventing myself, thinking about what's the story my future self wants to tell me. Mm-hmm. And how do I not be attached to outcomes, but just possibilities so that life is an unfolding story for me? And I really want to make sure that our listeners understand that I'm not just talking about professional. I've had what I will say a complete life as a woman. So even though I've been navigating what might people say men's careers in a man's world, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, I have experienced divorce, I've experienced the death of a spouse. I've been privileged and honored to know what it means to be a birther, a nurturer, and a mourner. And I have many children and many grandchildren. And that has been an important part of my reinvention as well, because you're always learning.
Carolyn, and you touched on this briefly, what gave you the courage to be a woman in a man's world throughout those earlier years? It's different now. It's far more accepted. But even I know as recent back as 15 years ago, a woman in a man's world was a tough place to be. I was in the alcohol spirits industry. It took me a year to convince the president and the owner of the company I was working for to hire the first female executive. A whole year. And this person was qualified. She went on to become one of our top sales reps. So what inspired you and what gave you the strength to do that, especially, 80s, 90s?
Well, I mentioned, first of all, I had a great model, my mother.
Yeah.
But first of all, I want to focus on the word courage. It's one of my favorite words. And the mission of my company is to help courageous leaders find their magic, trust their magic, and then know what to do with that magic, to use that magic honorably. And courage actually comes from the word kur, heart. And it means to go forward with your heart in your mouth at times of doubt, fear, and uncertainty. Which means, so what gave me the courage? It's because there was a need in the world. There was a need in the workplace. There was a need to make the world work. Mm-hmm. And that's what I heard from John F. Kennedy. Don't ask what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country, which means, the way you find meaning is really knowing what your unique contribution is to other people.
Yeah.
And that's what gave me courage. If it was just for myself, I'm not sure I would have had some of the courage of the things that I did, but it was never just for me. It was to know that I could make a contribution and the world was calling for that.
Mm-hmm.